Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives and welcome to the chat. It's Friday morning, and as I often do, I take my Friday morning show as an opportunity to catch up with you guys and to maybe delve a little deeper into some of the subjects we've been talking about this week with some of our guests, and otherwise, just to get a conversation going with the subscribers here and to thank you all for your attention to all the shows this past week, which has really been fun for me. Well, let's start off with apologies for starting late. I just got tied up in trying to do something on the technical, and I'm not very technically minded, so I lost track of time. I'm sorry. Michael Panzer, good morning. Corky, David, um, Jason, Leslie, and everyone else who is with us. See, we have 12 people according to the little counter up in the upper left, and you're all very, very welcome. Um, Lots of fun last night with Professor Hamamoto. I learned a lot. I did not know anything about these tyrannic, Turanic peoples. We've heard of Mongol hordes, right? And I guess that's the idea is that you think of them as a horde. It's like bees or something, don't want to be around those Mongol hordes. And they got a bad reputation in the around the time of the Crusades. Really, they were pressing into Europe, and professors bringing to our attention Mr. Shimatsu's writing. Yoichi Shimatsu, who writes on Rense.com, Rense, in case you wanted to chase that down. And I spent a bit of time this morning reading that article. I'm going very slowly to it because there's a lot of content. Uh, he kind of is, well, he kind of like me in a way. He tries to put things together that are very far apart with the idea of sifting through and trying to find the true patterns or the true connections, and whether can we really look at the present day Ukrainian leadership as the embodiment of the ancient Mongol hordes? Um, Interesting that idea that we have not been able to conceive of a political motive or an intelligent force behind the deep Asian population generally, whether we're talking about the Turkic peoples, the Chinese people, the Japanese people. The great tendency is to simply treat them as non-human or subhuman, but that leads us into trouble because we first of all, it's a violation of the principle that all men are created equal, and if we're going to work on our principles from the founding fathers, then we've got to consider, not only are the enslaved African um, people our brothers, but also the people of Asia, China, Japan, um, and to think of them not only as brothers, but as people who have brains just as good as we do, and just as competent to sort out things, and competent to lay traps, and competent to do good as well as evil. And I think that's where the question lies: is where is the goodness in these Mongol hordes? Are they not simply sent out into the world to take and destroy whatever they come across in order to convert it to their own use? Well, I don't know. But, you know, Shimatsu goes into a lot of analogies that are very interesting. He cites the American West, where the settlers, the Anglo-Saxon and Germanic American settlers are going out to encounter these quote savage unquote tribes and really to push them off their land and take their resources and convert it to their own use. And that was an example that could easily be applied to the approach of Christian Europe to the Mongol hordes. That is, that they are savages. They are not human. They're not fully um, enlightened, to use a term of uh, some reflective uh, meaning that really does open up the idea of how does the nobility, the ancient nobility of Europe, how do they view the serfs that they basically own, and they view them as serfs. They view them as expendable um, farm creatures. And so I got to the point where I really do believe that, number one, the United States with its Constitution is the last best hope of Earth for freedom, for fulfilling the dream, the words of the founding fathers, but also that this war in Ukraine is a takedown of the United States. And maybe that's not obvious, so I'll just give you my thinking is that by taking all of our resources and putting them into military hardware and paying people in Ukraine to do things, we're expending our treasure in a attempt to conquer Russia on behalf of the deep state or the city of London or the Wall Street or the bankers or whatever you want to call it, but not for the good of the American people. So as we deplete ourselves and, you know, turn our currency into into a less and less valuable thing to hold, we're destroying ourselves. And by destroying ourselves, we create the opportunity that the winners of Ukraine, the Zelensky people, who are obviously quite tied to the Biden people, are going to be able to subvert the rest of the government of the United States and turn us into one of those subject peoples underneath the thumb of the deep state, under the heel, as Aldous Huxley so well put it. The future of humanity is a boot pressed to the neck and grinding us away for eternity. Yep, lots to study. Corky, the Khans, and Tartaria. Interesting. I looked up the word Turan, Turan, to see what I could find, and it's related to the word tyranny, which is interesting. And also, I noted that there was an Etruscan god. The primary Etruscan god was called Turan, Turan. Interesting that that could be a connection to those ancient people of the steppes and Central Asia. Also, I thought it was fascinating to think about the uh, the whole story of the Khazars, and are these Khazars more of these Turkic peoples? I don't know. A lot of work will have to go into sorting that out, but it's it's fun. It's fun, and I think it's fruitful. So I'll be doing more work in that area. But again, I am certainly no expert, and I can't really give you much guidance at this point. Nevertheless, they've got more people than we do, and if there is a racial superiority um, element to their society, that it could explain a lot about the destruction of Europe, because Europe being basically Anglo-Saxon, or I'm sorry, not Anglo-Saxon, but Caucasian people, white people generally. If white people are the enemy of these tyrannic people based upon racial superiority theory, that's very important that we sort that out. But I don't know. I haven't studied it. Ancient Turkey, wild and amazing. Yeah. Russian Lukoil chairman found dead outside of hospital, said to have fallen out of window. Yeah. Well, you have these three obvious things that can go together. Number one, the blacklist. The Ukrainians publishing a blacklist with uh, prominent writers, Scott Ritter, Ray McGovern, Elga Zeplerouche, my good friend Harley Schlanger, Senate candidate Diane Sayre in New York, a number of other people who simply express their opinion are now on a blacklist. Then you have the assassination of Alexander Dugin's daughter, and now you add this one, which looks like a clear example of the William Donovan assassinations manual, 101. The most sure way to assassinate someone is a fall from a high place onto a hard surface. So with a historical view, we can start to think, geez, what does that tell us about what's going on in this country? And with Biden's connections to Kolomoisky, to Zelensky, to Burisma, is this a takedown of the United States going on right now that we're living through? I think we need to ask that question. And with Biden's rhetoric, from yesterday, where he says, Trump and his MAGA people are a threat to democracy. This is very close to fighting words, because the MAGA people I know are the supporters of democracy. And the Biden people I know are best called liberal totalitarians. I don't know who coined that phrase, but I'm adopting it. Liberal totalitarians. That's where Aldous Huxley's future lies, is that we're going to be so liberal that we're going to allow the tyrants to take over forever, permanently. And they think that that's a good thing. I don't I don't know how to wake people up except for to just keep doing what we're doing. Stage setting for Biden's speech. I didn't see it. I wonder if I can get a hold of it quickly. Democrats melt down after CNN host criticize Biden's speech. I can't imagine CNN hosts criticizing Biden's speech. Oh, okay, here we go. Here it is. I'll show this so everybody can see it. All right, so you can see what's going on here. Oh, an ad. Close. Okay, so the two Marines behind him is a break of White House traditions. The flag behind him, and of course the color red. What is the significance of all those red uh, back backlight colors? Let's see. It was red, foreboding, and looked like an occult film setting. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. This is, appealing to the subconscious. And yeah, seeing red. That's what they want us to do. They want us to start something. Red and black are Jesuit colors. Okay. I'd like to know who wrote that speech. Good question. His speech was classic disinformation presented as they always do. They accuse you of doing exactly what they themselves do. That's right. And I said this to my wife this morning. I said, this is fascism succeeding by accusing the non-fascists of being fascists, right? That's exactly what they do. Another way to put it is they will beat you over the head with your own principles. In other words, we are anti-fascists, but they will then come and beat us up, claiming that we're the fascists. And that's the narrative that Biden is pushing now. That if you are a MAGA person, if you follow President Trump, if you have the nerve to suggest that perhaps there was some flaws with the election, then that makes you an enemy of democracy. These are the same people that want to take our guns away. And as my wife and I were discussing this morning, how can you have a democracy if the citizens aren't armed? It's not possible. It's not possible that you couldn't have had an American Revolution without arms. And as Drummer was saying this morning, we've just spent a month studying the Irish Revolution, the Irish Rebellion of 1916. And the big issue in the 1916 Easter Rebellion was arms. And they were prepared to rise up. But they had a shipment of arms that was coming. And it was based upon the idea that they were going to get some arms that they planned to rise up and declare the Irish Republic in Easter of 1916. But the arms shipment got intercepted. And when the arms shipment was intercepted the day before the planned uprising, the leaders were thrown into confusion. Some of them wanted to go ahead with the revolution, and some of them wanted to stop it because they knew that they would get butchered. And of course, part of them did go ahead and they did get butchered. You know, those are the martyrs of what we now call the free Irish Republic. How free it is, really, I don't know, because of the tentacles of the British banking system and the control of the airwaves and the media from Murdoch and the BBC. But without the arms, their revolution failed at the first attempt. Nevertheless, their declaration of independence did survive. And it's on that basis that Ireland exists today. Now consider Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world. If there wasn't a rifle to pull the, and a rifleman to pull the trigger, there wouldn't have been no shot heard around the world. And the Americans would still be servants of the British Empire. So yeah, this idea that somehow democracy demands us to be servants, to be servile, to be serfs, and to be subject to elimination at the whim of our rulers is the most absurd idea that could be brought up by any American. And yet these people are following Biden right down that primrose path into destruction. Leslie McKenzie says, no freedom before America. That's what I say. I say that without the Constitution, there is no personal freedom anywhere, and there never was, ever, ever. You know, I mean, look what happened to Jesus, right? Look, look what happens to anybody that goes against the state. You know, you get assassinated, you get killed. The idea of a community declaring itself free, you know, suppose you and a number of people around you were able to make yourself self-sufficient, that you had the assets, the resources, the tools, the industry, the financial know-how, that you could actually create a totally independent community of, say, you know, 10,000 or 100,000, or whatever is a sensible number to create that community. Could you do that within any of the empires before the United States existed? No, they would come and destroy you. They don't want any competition. They don't want you to be powerful enough to sustain your own lives and the future of your people. So they will come and destroy you. And look at the United States, where we've had a number of experiments of that type, where people will say, okay, we're going to just go off on our own and we're going to be self-sufficient. Where those things end up, they generally fail because of lack of resources over time or other reasons. There's very different fates of these different groups. But nobody in the U.S. government said, oh my God, these Shakers, they're running their own thing. We better stop them. Why? Because they recognized, the government recognized at that time the personal freedom of people to believe as they wish to and to live alone without interacting with the federal government in any way. Well, with digital currency coming along, the government's going to be a participant in every financial transaction you make. How could anybody want that to happen? It's only propaganda. But no, I stand by my statement, Leslie. There has been no freedom in the history of the world before the United States of America. And that's where Lincoln comes in and says, we have got to save it. We've got to preserve it. Truth doesn't seem to be working. I know sometimes you do feel like you're putting truth out there and nobody wants to hear it. But you just have to keep on going. You just have to keep on doing it. That's the only answer I can give you. Red rarely used as a background. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you don't see red as a background very often. And it's a kind of a blood red too, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I don't know who the president is anymore. Once I couldn't tell if he had blue eyes or black eyes. Can you? Can you tell which one it is? Or does he have some contact lenses that he puts in just to fool us? Because he's so smart, he thinks he can get away with it. No, I tend to think he's got a number of different doubles out there. Some of them smarter than others. Some of them just pure brain dead, run by you know computer chips in his head. Is all I can figure. It doesn't make any sense that the different physical characteristics that people have noticed couldn't be the same guy, could it? I think there's different ones, and I'm also quite suspicious about the person they call the Queen of England too. I wonder how old is she, and is she not just a body double from somebody that's been gone a long time? I don't know. I have to ask the questions. If we don't ask the questions, we'll never know. Carbon dioxide is good for the earth. Who knew? Yeah, John Wilkes was a on our side, and you know that just points to the great tragedy of the Civil War, because the leaders of the South really did believe that race-based slavery was correct. People like John Wilkes Booth grew up in an era and a time when nobody believed that black people could be as competent and literate, intellectual, reasonable, uh, and a good choice for leadership. You know, they just didn't believe it. So their idea of freedom basically meant freedom for people like themselves. they weren't going to let the Chinese people be free. If they came to the United States, they came as laborers and not to be free people. Look at all the farm workers, the migrants have to go back to Mexico, back to Central America when the uh, harvest season is over. So these particular people have the minds are poisoned with race-based slavery as being acceptable and the default position. And so that's how we can have a Junius Booth name his son John Wilkes Booth, thinking, he's admiring free speech. At the same time, he's somebody that would not approve of his daughter marrying a black person or a black person rising to high public office. So there's the sad tragedy of, the propaganda of the British Empire that a person's skin color determines whether they're a slave or not. It's appalling, but we have to get past it. Yeah, sic semper tyrannis. That's what he said. In-law Quaker family built the safest, well-appointed ship sent to free the free slaves back to Africa. There were no takers. Yeah. Yeah, Liberia was a sad uh, episode in, the the fallacy that somehow these people, generally not first generation, even second, third, fourth generation American black people, would somehow be amenable to being sent back to Africa to live in a place where they have no means of support, no contacts, nobody to look out for them, a place of no future. And doesn't it look really more like a dumping ground for the American aristocracy to just dump people? Um, don't really care whether they go to Africa or where they go, just get them out of here. That was a typical Southern attitude. And Northern too. Let's be fair. Route 3 says migrant workers want to return to Mexico after the harvest. Try as we may to keep the good ones to stay, they long for the slower pace to the south. A few took wives in both countries, had families in both. I don't think that's a fair statement. And, but, you know, they didn't really want to come here in the first place. But we've, through our huge corporate power, have taken over the economy where they live. And people like William Randolph Hearst, for instance, who owned, million-acre ranches in Mexico. Where does it leave land for the Mexicans to grow their own crops? It's like Guatemala with the United Fruit Company owning all the land, owning the transportation system, running the telephones and the banking and everything. Yeah, I don't think anybody really wants to leave their homeland, but they had to, and the migrants generally sent their money back home the best way they could because they knew that the folks back home needed it desperately to survive. So the migrants weren't brought here to make them American citizens, and they weren't brought here because of their ability to contribute to our culture or our progress as humans. They were brought here to pick vegetables because they would do it for a rate so low that no American would want to do the job. Leslie says, not a great show today. Well, sorry, Leslie, I don't think I can please everyone. And so I hope you have a good day. Yeah, I've noticed in the past that Leslie tends to just want to push and push and push her issues, and she needs to find another place to do that. Oh, David Underdown is here. David says, I don't know about Mel besides movies, but Ari Emanuel and Patrick Whitesell must be devastated that Jeff Bezos scooped his wife. Okay, all that stuff I don't know about. Um, who are you talking about? Mel Brooks? All right, that's funny. What song is in your heart, John? It's usually American Anthem, by Gene Shear. Each generation, from plains to distant shore, with what they were given, were determined to leave more. Battles fought together, acts of conscience fought alone. These have been the seeds from which America has grown. Let them say of me, I was one who believed, and I am one who believes in, the dream of freedom. And sure, if you have a civilization before the United States where people were free, please point it out to me because I wouldn't mind being wrong on that. But I don't, in my studies, I haven't found anyone, anywhere. Okay. Endeavor talk, I don't know what it is. Oh, Mel Gibson. Oh, Mel Gibson is a tragic figure, isn't he? I I love his movies. He makes great movies first from the action adventure part and the heroes. Um, if you like uh, those things, his movie The Patriot may be a little overdrawn, but it does. You do have to think of Tarleton and the willingness of these British Empire servants to use you know really terror tactics, burning, um, destroying people's crops and livelihood, and whatever else it took. And I love the fact that he lost. I love to study the ways in which the British imperialists lost in the American Revolution. You know, uh, David Underdown on his Twitter and put a reference up to Lord Fairfax, the Virginia Lord Fairfax, Thomas Fairfax, and Fort Belvoir, and the fact that Belvoir was built as the original Belvoir was a mansion, or an elite house on the banks of the Potomac, where Fort Belvoir is now. And the connection of that name, Culpeper, which was, I believe, his mother's name, Fairfax's mother, who had the money that ended up with him owning this huge Fairfax tract, the Grant, the Northern Neck. Well, is that reflected in the word culper, spy ring, of which George Washington was a beneficiary? And do we find once again a connection between the Jacobite Scottish Revolution or revolutions and the American Revolution through Fairfax and through his kind of minty George Washington? So that the idea of the American Revolution being a combination not between Southern aristocrats, which is the way history books tell us, right? That it's the Southern aristocrats, the slave owners, with the Northeast, the Anglo-Saxon, from the Puritan tradition of, leave us alone, we want to have our own new world. And there were strange bedfellows in a way, because the tradition in the North would have built up industry, whereas the tradition in the South would build up agriculture and large plantations with slave labor. Those are strange bedfellows. Why would they join together, other than the enemy of my enemy is my friend? But after the revolution, the struggle continues between the people that supported the Jacobean kings, Charles I, Charles II, James I, James II, and then the pretenders and the 1715 and 1745 revolutions against really what was the budding power of the city of London, expressed through the Hanoverian takeover of the crown with George I, with Queen Anne being the figure in between, where both sides were still active, but with the financial power taken over through William of Orange and the Dutch, then you end up with the Jacobites having no place except for America to pursue their own dream of freedom. And sadly, the Jacobite dream did include race-based slavery, which was, one of the great investments of the Jacobean rulers. As I was reading the other day, James II created the Royal African Company with the purpose of importing slaves into the southern states, meaning the previous, the uncivilized South, specifically the Carolinas, Carolina being named after Charles. Can you change the screen to JFK, a real president? Yeah, I can. Yeah, glad to. All right, John F. Kennedy, a real president. A lot of Highlanders who lost at Culloden fought for the Dutch, French, Spanish, and then landed in the Carolinas and Florida. Yep. And you know that Battle of Kings Mountain is very significant and sad in that, the Americans were fighting against the British regiments, but the regiments were Scottish Highlanders. Uh-oh, there goes an ad. Okay, well, it lasted as long as it did. Hey, I'm sorry about this light that's behind me. It's I one of my main light burned out, and so I'm using a smaller one to replace it. But it does kind of have reflections that are hard to get rid of. Yeah, I've never been to Dealey Plaza. I imagine I would suffer the same thing, Michael. UNC Chapel Hill is all over the pandemic, definitely under the radar. Yeah. Yeah, isn't that where Barrick is, Ralph Barrick? Creepy stuff. And, I saw yesterday, you probably saw it, how people have found him in the early 2000s working on creating myocarditis i- in mice. And, it's just so creepy that somebody would actually try to do that. And if they could do it in mice, of course, you know what the next step is. Washington was the Fairfax grand nephew. I guess that's one way to look at it. His uncle was married to the daughter of Fairfax, if I have that right, David. So yeah, and that's his connection, you know. So is that Culpeper name the same as the Culper spy ring that discovered the treason of Benedict Arnold? And was Benedict Arnold working with the British on behalf of certain American interests that really favored the British in the Revolution? And is that where we connect to the Aaron Burr conspiracy? Yeah, it is. So whatever's going on in Virginia, when we talk about the Army of Northern Virginia as something that still exists, that's faced, maybe even faced based at Fort Belvoir, where, as George Webb says, they have all those old murals from the Third Reich. Is is the Jacobite faction still active? And if so, does that explain all of these seven society and the Kappa Alpha being the successor to the KKK? I think there's a lot there to be studied, just like there's a lot more for me to study about the tyrannic people, excuse me, that Professor Hamamoto and Yoichi Shimatsu have turned me on to, pursuant to last night. Well, I am a little bit um, under the weather. I've got a little bit of a cold. And so I think I will go ahead and close the show this morning. Yeah. Laura, you live near Kings Mountain. Fascinating. Yeah. It's the details of the Southern campaign are really interesting. And again, another refugee from Scotland, Mercer, who was the hero of the Battle of Cowpens. That's another example of these uh, Jacobites coming to America, and it being really their movement, despite the fact that they were believers in race-based slavery, that led to the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was their spokesperson, and John Adams was the spokesperson for the New England rebels. New England Rebellion was based upon Freemasonry of that sort, of the industrial sort, of the Benjamin Franklin sort. The Southern Freemasonry came along later. Those are two different approaches, both allied with branches of Freemasonry. And it does get rather obscure and esoteric, but to generally divide the York Rite from the uh, Southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite is a good start. Mobster says the Jesuits helped organize Culloden, and that resonates with me because of what I think was going on was they stirred up the clans in order to massacre the clans, because the Jesuits, as much as the Hanoverians, had an interest in getting rid of the indigenous power of native people everywhere. And so by stirring up the 15 and the 45, they're leading them to slaughter. And that's what happened. Nevertheless, the Jacobite dream lived on in America and other places around the world, I'm sure. Well, Turanians, Jacobites, Hanoverians, all these forces that swirl around us are still there. And in order to understand where we are, where we came from, and where we're headed, we just have to keep doing this work. So thanks for being with me. I appreciate very much your company. Thanks for your support on Patreon. And I wish you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. I will see you Monday. And guess what? Riley Wagaman will be back with Edward Slavsquat's latest opinions on what's really going on in Moscow. What's Putin really up to? And from their perspective of Moscow itself, it's always a fascinating exchange. So we've got that lined up next week. A lot of other fun stuff. So be sure and join us. Keep up with our calendar at screamingospreys.com. And thank you again to Jumping Mouse, our dear Catherine, for scheduling and maintaining the calendar, stuff I couldn't possibly do without her.